Going. All right, we're live. Okay, thank you. All right, well, we are back. None of you are here because you've either given up and gone home or you're watching the stream that crashed, wondering what happened. So I apologize profusely for the fact that for the last several episodes here at Macomb, we have battled this issue. Do not know what's causing that. Internet looks good. We've done updates on the machine, but it's extremely embarrassing and frustrating for me that it's been a good 2 months since we've gotten through an ATA without a glitch, which somewhat pisses me off, to be honest with you. So we'll keep working on that. So I don't know exactly where I lost you all. But I'm going to start my corn fungicide conversation over again because I think you probably missed out on most, if not all of that. You might have missed out on more than that, but if you did, the other stuff you missed out on is not quite this important. So we were talking about, if you're going to apply fungicide once in corn, I often recommend 2, even 3 applications in corn, depending on timing and what's going on in the world. But if you're only going to do it once, and you want to know what is the most important time to put fungicide on corn, it is VT to R1. VT being tassel, R1 being pollination. So that is the sweet spot window. That is the window where you have the best odds of getting a plant health related yield increase from the strobilurin and fungicides, which would be the stress relieving properties of the strobies. The main reason for that is the most stressful time in this plant's life is right after pollination. That's when it's got the most kernels it's ever going to have. That's when it's working the hardest it's ever going to work. That's when it is trying to hang on to as many of those pollinated kernels as it can. That's when tip back is occurring. That is when that plant is working the hardest. And if you want your best odds of getting a benefit from a fungicide by relieving stress in the plant, you need to have it in the plant before the most stressful point in the plant's life occurs. The other reason that this is the best time to spray fungicide is that is early enough that it gets ahead of most diseases. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you may or may not have heard this, we are finding some tar spot. When you find tar spot by tassel, those are the years that I get worried that tar spot could kind of be a big deal. In 22 and 23, we had very dry Junes. We did not have good conditions for tar spot to develop early. Tar spot was here and easy to find by harvest, but tar spot did not really impact yield in central Illinois in 22 or 23, even though it was here. I think that will be the norm for us with tar spot. I don't think we're going to have horrific, problems from tar spot every year. But when we get the right growing conditions, which we have had this year, if you look at the extended forecast, it looks perfect for growing corn and tar spot. And we're finding it early. And when you find it early, that means it's got time to get bad. And so you need to get the fungicide on before it gets bad. Now, a lot of people out there are recommending later applications of fungicide. And we do too, if it's your second pass. If it's your first pass, waiting till brown silk is a really bad idea. Because by that time, if the diseases are going to be a yield limiting factor, you've already got so much of your plant infected at that point that you're not really going to be able to benefit that plant as much as you could have from that fungicide application. And the plant has already suffered through the most stressful period of its life. So whether you're talking tar spot or crown rot, which are 2 diseases that have really crippled some cornfields in recent years, the best time to spray fungicide is in this VT to R1 window. Now, we often recommend a V5, on small corn to help with crown rot as well, which I believe that it does. I think it's worth doing. That is your cheapest fungicide application opportunity, lowest cost of application. We're usually using a reduced rate. That application is very affordable relative to what you're going to do after tassel. but it actually doesn't do as much to prevent crown rot as this timing does. Now, the two together are better than either one separately. But if you're going to do it once, here's the time to do it. So to me, there are three application windows for fungicide in corn. There's the early vegetative window, which is, let's say, V4 to V7. There is the VT to R1 window, which is the sweet spot. And then in years where tar spot is looking like it has the potential to be devastating, like it was in 2021 in parts of central Illinois, that's when we're going to look at that second application during grain fill, probably in that R3, R4 ish window, which R3 would be roasting ear stage, R4 would be the dough stage or the chewy sweet corn stage. Now in 2021, there were some guys that put fungicide on as late as dent and saw a positive response. Now that was just because 2021 we were such a hot mess with diseases, and anytime you sprayed fungicide in 2021, you saw a positive response. I would actually, as a general rule, not ever make a recommendation of R5 fungicide in corn. I think that's too late for maximum benefit. And even though we saw a benefit from those applications in 2021, I think we would have seen a bigger benefit from those applications if they'd gone on 2 or 3 weeks earlier than they did. But that was a good illustration that if it's bad enough, like it was in 2021, even if it seems too late to get any benefit from it, we still saw a benefit. So I am not able to see the chat, Jennifer, just giving you a heads up for whatever reason. I don't know that I've ever had the screen look like this where I can't see the chat while I'm talking. But if anybody asks a question in the chat that you think we need to discuss here on the air, send me a text. I'll try to keep an eye on my phone, and we'll try to get it addressed that way. So once again, I see some of you have made it back to the live Ask the Agronomist. And again, I apologize for those that were logged in before and had to log back in because we lost the stream. The joys of modern technology there. So, and unless there's any specific corn fungicide questions, one thing I will talk about a little bit is rate. So I get lots of questions about, is it worth doing fungicide or is it not? I get lots of questions about timing. I get a few questions about, what product should I use? I get questions about rate. Let's see if Jennifer has sent me. Okay. Oh. She says, I set it for children, so she had to change it. So she says, if you refresh your stream, you will be in the live. So once again, we're still struggling here. So when I created a new stream, I didn't do it right, which is not surprising at all because I didn't have Jennifer to do that for me. So anyway, I had some new people watching today, and so I was wanting them to have a good experience. And so this will probably be the last time the new people join Ask the Agronomist if it's going to be this much of a train wreck. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about rate. So fungicides, most fungicides, not all, most fungicides have a range of rates. And those range of rates would go from, some have like a half rate. For early applications, you go up to the standard rate at VT, and then there's the full rate. So in the case of Delaro and Delaro Complete, 4 ounces, which would be a half rate, that's what I would recommend at a V5 application. 8 ounces would be the standard rate, which is what we always used to recommend in the days before tar spot and in the days before we learned what the benefits of a full rate were at VT to R1. And then the full rate is 12 ounces. So, And then there are people that will play with the rate in between these two levels. And I would say in recent years, due to the additional yield increase that people have seen from full rates, the additional residual protection that you can get, and the improvement in tar spot control that you can get from going up to full rates, people have been toying with these 10 and 12 ounce rates and seeing some very, very positive responses. A couple growers that I work with, they've been using full rates of the products they've been using for years just because they made the decision that, well, my application cost, which for fungicides is fairly significant, my application cost is the same no matter what rate of fungicide I'm applying. So while I'm spending all this money on application, I want to get the most protection I can get. So I'm putting a full rate out there. Now full rates are, in this case, cost 50% more than the standard rate. So I get it, it's expensive. But you do get a lot better protection from a full rate than you do the standard rate. And, in the standard rate of Delar and Delar Complete, in a lot of university trials, I mean, it's extremely competitive, usually right near the top, even against those products that only have one rate, which they claim that one rate is a full rate. Just because you have one rate doesn't mean it's a full rate. It just means it's the rate you have. And I think if more and more people, try these higher rates, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the magnitude of the response that you can see from that. A lot of producers have told me, hey, something weird's going on when my neighbor and I overlap on each other on these field edges. I'm getting the best corn in the whole field, like 20 or 30 bushel bump in that field edge where we drifted on each other. We've done some trial work looking at some high rates. Now 2X rates are not labeled, obviously, so we can't go above 12 ounces. But we are definitely seeing a rate effect from fungicide. And it's not all just tar spot, because we've seen this in fields with tar spot. We've seen this in fields without tar spot. We've seen this in bad disease pressure years. We've seen this in years like 22 and 23 where disease pressure was low. Okay, so I'm trying to watch my text here. So we're up to the most live viewers we've had all morning. So that's a good sign that it's working, because you keep finding me, you keep signing in. So if you're there watching live, I thank you. I owe you a beer if you're still with me here, because I know it's been painful this morning. So thank you. So let's move to soybeans. So we'll stay on the fungicide conversation, but probably the most common question I've gotten related to fungicide and soybeans is, if you planted soybeans the first week of April, which a lot of you did, Cal had beans planted in March. Those beans have been blooming for over a month. They've got pods on them that big. And those beans, in a lot of cases, would already stage R3. And we talked about the sweet spot in corn. Well, the sweet spot in soybeans is R3. And you can expand that probably to R2 to R4. R3 is a pretty big window. It's not that hard to hit it in R3, but there are, times we maybe get a little busy. You want to go a little early, you want to go a little late. So R2 to R4, I circled R3. You could find soybeans today that aren't even knee high yet that would stage at R3 based on development. I would not recommend spraying early planted soybeans with fungicide as soon as you hit R3 or R2.5, unless you are being a very aggressive, ambitious soybean producer trying to raise 100 bushel beans, and you're going to put fungicide on those beans twice. The reason I say that is because that early planted soybean at R3 has not even reached 50% of its full grown size. This is also one of the reasons I don't like pre-tassel fungicide in corn. Fungicides do not move systemically in the plant. They are at best locally systemic, which what locally systemic means is if you get it on the leaf, it will move in the leaf somewhat. It's not going to move from the leaves you sprayed to the leaves that come out 2 weeks later. So when you spray fungicide, you are protecting what's there when you spray. If half of the plant is not even there yet, that half of the plant, which is the upper part of the plant, which is the most important part of the plant, gets no protection from the fungicide whatsoever. So, in my opinion, you got two options in soybeans, early planted soybeans. You either spray twice, which honestly, with the yield potential that some of these early planted beans have, is probably what we ought to do. But I get it. If you've never done that before, that might sound a little crazy to you, especially with $10 beans instead of $15 beans. But I would say try it and see what you think. But if you're only going to spray once in soybeans, these early planted beans are going to be in that R3 growth stage for weeks. And I would rather we kind of be a little bit patient and let that soybean get closer to its full grown size and maybe catch it towards the end of the R3 window. And beans will do weird things. I've seen beans that, you could call them R4 and then they put on some new growth. And the next time you look at them, well, they're only R3. I've seen them be R3 and the next time you look at them, they're R2. So if they put on a surge of vegetative growth, sometimes they kind of will appear like they're going backwards in their stage of development because of how we measure development through the R stages in soybeans. So there's a pretty big window for fungicide in soybeans. If you've ever tried to win a soybean yield contest, you've probably talked to other people who win soybean yield contests. They typically spray fungicide every 2 to 3 weeks from flowering through the rest of the growing season. So that's being uber aggressive with fungicide management in soybeans. If you just want to be kind of normal person aggressive with fungicide in soybeans, maybe play around with some 2-shot programs on your early planted beans because they will benefit from fungicide early. They're setting pods, they're blooming, they're setting nodes, they're trying to fill pods. That's some of the magic. And Cal actually did a good job talking about this 2 weeks ago. That's where the magic comes from in early planted soybeans. Early planted soybeans spend a lot more days in the summer in the reproductive growth stages. And you want to be helping that plant as much as you can when it's in the reproductive growth stages, which is what fungicide protection will do. And you want those plants to spend more days of their life in those reproductive growth stages, which is what planting earlier will do. And those two things go together quite well. The other topic related to, apologize, I'm going to keep watching this here. Okay, we got some questions coming in. So awesome. So thank you, Drew. Thank you, Gary. Two of my loyal listeners that are putting up with my crap here this morning. So did he say he saw tar spot? Yes, he did. He has seen tar spot in multiple areas. We found some at Roanoke yesterday, which is north of Peoria, in some April planted corn that's about a week away from tassel. So that'll be just perfect for that VT timing. And there was corn in the Jacksonville area that was documented with tar spot probably a week-ish ago. Which at that time, it was also about a week from tassel. So once again, perfect timing for that VTR1 application. So I wouldn't say that it's easy to find tar spot right now, but if you look in your biggest corn, and if you try to find it, it wouldn't surprise me if you would find some tar spot. So look low on the plant. It can really start about anywhere. Historically, it starts low and moves up, because it likes the cool, damp darkness of the lower canopy. Once it gets rolling and gets going, it can kind of show up anywhere. But typically, it starts lower on the plant, but you could find it anywhere on the plant. But I would say look in the bottom half of the plant if you're trying to find it. If you find a black speck on a leaf that you think might be tar spot, the first thing you do is just try to scrape it off with your finger. If it scrapes off, it was not tar spot. If it doesn't scrape off, lick your finger and moisten that. If you can soften it up, moisten it up, and then wipe it off, it was probably some sort of bird feces or fly feces or something that you maybe don't want in your mouth. It was not tar spot. But if it can't be wiped off, if it can't be moistened and wiped off, and it looks like tar spot, it most likely is tar spot. And if you're not sure, contact your dealer, contact your local rep. We're trying to track the development of the disease. So we've actually got an app that we've developed. That's a tar spot tracker app, and we're trying to feed that app with information as far as where it's showing up. So if you find it, let us know. And so the follow-up question for Drew there was, if you do find it pre-tassel, would you apply pre-tassel? So if you ever found tar spot at, say, waist high corn or chest high corn that was a few weeks away from tassel, yes, I would consider making a pre-tassel application. In general, I don't like pre-tassel applications in corn. I like early vegetative or after tassel. In that pre-tassel stage, they're just, I just don't like them. Other people recommend them. Other people have other thoughts. But in theory, if tar spot gets bad early enough, yes, that might cause me to want to pull the trigger a little earlier. But if you're within a week of tassel, I would still wait till VT, even if you're finding tar spot, because I still think you're far enough ahead of it that it's not going to be a big deal. But if you're more than a week away from tassel and finding tar spot, especially if you scour a 80-acre field and you find one lesion, okay, you found tar spot. But if you're finding multiple lesions per plant, and you're more than a week away from tassel, then maybe I'll change my tune and shift that application a little earlier. But just be aware, if you're spraying fungicide before tassel, I would say you should absolutely plan on another application at R3-ish. And be careful how late you go with that second application, because fungicides give us a couple weeks of residual protection. Depending on the rate, depending on the product, you might stretch it to 3 weeks, but that's the max. And if you've got 6 weeks between your 2 shots of fungicide, that means you had about 3 to 4 weeks there in the middle where you had no protection before that second application was made. And if in that 3 to 4 week window where you had no protection, you got a lot of infection, that later application might have been too late to keep things healthy. So there's a reason why the yield contest people are spraying fungicide every 2 to 3 weeks all year long. It's because fungicide only lasts 2 to 3 weeks. So when we get what appears to be season-long protection from a fungicide, that's a little bit of a misnomer. The reason we get what looked like season-long protection was because you stopped the disease, you prevented the disease, you broke the disease cycle, and then the environment changed to where the disease never got fired up again, or it didn't have time to rebuild to where it had, the potential to cause any damage. The fungicides do not last all summer. I don't care what rate you use. I don't care what product you use. If you're applying fungicides at tassel, you're not getting any fungal control in August. You're not even getting any fungal control in late July from that tassel time application. But if you stop the disease, if you break the disease cycle, if you prevent it for 2 to 3 weeks, oftentimes it doesn't have time to get started back up again in time to cause problems. But if you spray it V14 3 weeks plus before tassel, you're giving that disease all kinds of time to get fired back up again in time to hurt your yield. So that's why I'm careful with those pre-tassel applications. Okay, so Gary's question was, he's seeing more uneven corn than normal in his area, which that's due to all the flooding that you guys went through and a lot of people went through in late April and May. And those wet areas are set back. In some places, those wet areas are replant. So if you've got very uneven corn, ideally, I would like the whole field to be close to tassel or showing tassels, at least the tassel peeking up out of the whorl before I spray fungicide. However, here's a caveat to that. If the worst 10% of your field, you got to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get it to tassel, and the best 95% of your field, you miss the sweet spot window waiting for the worst 5% of your field to get to tassel. That doesn't make any sense. I would rather take a chance on hurting the bad corn in the field while I'm trying to make the best corn in the field better. So ideally, do I want the whole field at least showing some tassels? Yes. But at some point, you got to say, okay, I'm not waiting any longer for these crappy parts of my field to get to tassel because I'm getting close to brown silk on the good corn in the field. And I'm losing protection on that while I'm waiting for the part of the field that's not going to be very good anyway. So don't wait too long. You know, if you can drag your feet a few days and let the rest of it catch up, that I think I'd probably like that. But if you're finding lots of tar spots, so back to let's combine Drew and Gary's scenarios here. If you're finding tar spot in the field, I wouldn't be waiting for the stunted parts of the field to catch up. I'd go for it. If your field is still clean and the thoughts enter in your mind, oh, I'm sure I need to do this. There's no disease here. You still need to do it. But if your field is that clean, you're not seeing any disease. Well, then okay, I'm all right waiting a few days to let the stunted areas catch up. But don't wait too long. Would be my thoughts. Okay, so thanks for the questions, guys. Appreciate it. All right. We didn't really talk too much about inclusion of insecticide with fungicide. So we talked about the insect pressure. I mean, stink bugs have been awful. Corn rootworm is really bad in Northern Illinois once again. So poor Northern Illinois, epicenter for tar spot, epicenter for rootworm. My colleague Jim Donnelly, super guy. He wants to be known for something other than tar spot and rootworm. But he's dealing with both of those problems year in and year out, which should make us pretty thankful that it's been years since we've had a bad rootworm issue, and we only have tar spot intermittently. Northern Illinois, you can pretty well count on bad rootworm, bad tar spot every year. So that's just a tough row to hoe. But I think for lots of reasons, I mean, we've always been a strong recommender, a strong proponent of including a good insecticide with your fungicide in soybeans. Northern Illinois has done quite a bit of insecticide with fungicide in corn, trying to get their corn rootworm beetle population under control a little bit more than it is. In this area, sometimes if there's Japanese beetles, sometimes guys will throw insecticide in with corn. It's less common in corn. I think with the stink bug pressure we're seeing, the corn rootworm pressure that we're seeing in some areas, the Japanese beetle pressure that we're starting to see, I just think while you're there, while you're investing the money in the application, while you're investing the money in the fungicide, I would invest a little bit more, and I get it. I sympathize as a farmer. It's hard to know where to stop there because we can bump the rate on the fungicide. We can add insecticide. We can add in some foliars. We can do this. We can do that. And pretty soon, that program that you used to think was $20 is over $50. So I get it. At some point, you're going to cry uncle and say, no more. So we got to draw the line somewhere, but I would really strongly urge you to consider adding insecticide on your corn application and absolutely on the soybeans. There are times, colleague of mine, Darren Bohannon, Darren's a legacy Bayer guy, a very, very sharp tech rep for Bayer. He did trials for years on soybeans where he would spray straight fungicide, straight insecticide, and the two together in trials. And he documented years where the straight insecticide was delivering most of the yield benefit. Now, he didn't have any years where there was no yield benefit to fungicide, but he did have years where the yield benefit of the insecticide was greater than the fungicide. And especially if you are trying to be a high manager, you want to be a high manager of your soybeans and you're striving for 80 plus bushel soybeans. I think there are lots of times when stink bugs, bean leaf beetles, Japanese beetles, other insects that feed on soybeans are doing enough damage collectively. Maybe each individual species is not above threshold, but collectively their impact is above threshold, and there would be a benefit to reducing those insect populations in soybeans. So I would say every time you're spraying fungicide in soybeans, be sure you've got a good insecticide with it. Our product's called Leverage. I love that product. It's not the most commonly used insecticide because a lot of retailers have their own brands that they would prefer to sell. And it is a premium product, but I don't do commercials here on ATA, but I will come close to doing a commercial for Leverage, because if you've never used it, it is a special product. It is a unique product, and it has benefits for plants that go beyond just controlling insects. So something to play around with if you want to try something new. And I also think this is not something that's common, but I do think that there are a lot of situations where at like R5-ish in soybeans, a few weeks after you did your R3, it would probably be, well worth the investment to make another application of insecticide. Not sure we need more fungicide at that point in time on soybeans, unless we're dealing with really bad frog eye, or it's some new if Asian soybean rust, which at one time we thought was going to be a thing for us. That's really never been a thing for us. If it became a thing for us, or if frog eye was really bad, you might want more fungicide later in the season. But I think for us, if you're going to get a benefit from a late application in soybeans, and by late I mean later than R3, that's going to be coming from the insecticide. So I would encourage you to be aggressive with your insecticide. Okay, let's finish on a soapbox here, and let's talk about weed management. So I think in the version of this that crashed, I had my buddy up here. So we all know what that is, right? That's a mare's tail. If you've got these in your soybeans, if you've got live mare's tail in a field with live soybeans today, or in this era, you're going to have live mare's tail in that field until it dies of old age. Because there is nothing on the market today, legal or illegal, that's going to kill this plant in your soybean fields. We have to control mare's tail in the fall. We have to. If you don't control it in the fall, you have to control it in the spring. It is far easier to control it in the fall. Any field that had a fall burn down, you're not going to find this. Any field that had a good spring burn down, you're not going to find this. You're going to find this in no-till fields or vertical tilled fields that did not have a good burn down either in the fall or spring. And when I say good burn down, it's got to have more than Roundup and 2,4-D in it if you want to kill this in the spring. You might kill this in the fall with Roundup and 2,4-D, but you're not going to in the spring. Too much glyphosate resistance in mare's tail, and that resistance gets a lot stronger after it goes through the winter. There are times when we can seemingly kill glyphosate resistant mare's tail in the fall, and it seems like Roundup is helping on that in the fall. It's not going to seem like it's helping kill these weeds in the spring. Liberty's not going to kill this. Dicamba's not going to kill this. 2,4-D is not going to kill this. Throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this mare's tail is not going to kill this. So you got to get that taken care of in the fall or in the spring. So we all know what this is, right? That's a 6-inch tall water hemp plant, and I say that facetiously because we act like this is a 6-inch tall water hemp plant. This field's already been sprayed once. It's going to get sprayed again. It might get sprayed again after that. This plant's going to be there at harvest, unless, well, this one won't be because I pulled it. But he's got about 10 million friends in this field. I mean, this field is solid water hemp. They're not all this big. This is one of the bigger ones I found. But it is, you can't hardly see the beans in this field for water hemp that's that size. And you can see it's been dinged. There was an attempt made, a feeble attempt made to control this water hemp. I don't know if it could have been a rain-off situation, could have been a misapplication, could have been somebody that was just, I'm not sure what, but this was a complete miss in this field. And I'm sure it's on schedule to get resprayed, but you're not going to kill that. And I drive past, I could have trespassed in about 10 different fields that had water hemp this size that had either not been sprayed yet or had been recently sprayed. And when I say recently, within the last week. And I drive by field after field after field after field of, most of them enlist beans these days, where guys are trying to kill weeds this big. Ain't going to work. That, it's not necessarily bad for bear when enlist fields are a mess. But it's bad for the farmers that own those fields. We have got to be better weed managers. I'm going to give a shout out to a good friend and mentor of mine, Randy McElroy. Randy's actually retiring from Bayer this year. Randy was ahead of his time. Randy has been talking about weed management in soybeans for over 10 years. And the distinction that Randy always made was, and I used to kind of make fun of him when he would say this because I thought it sounded a little bit hokey, but the more I think about it and the more I experience bad weed management, I realized Randy was right. We shouldn't be trying to control weeds. We need to manage weeds. Letting them get like this and then trying to kill them, you're trying to control this weed. If you were managing this weed, it would have never been here because you would have either controlled it with your pre or you would have sprayed it with something when it was that tall and it wouldn't have gotten to this stage. So being a better weed manager means using a pre. It might mean using a better pre. It might mean using a higher rate of a pre. It might mean using more modes of action in your pre. It might mean using additional residual post. It might mean making earlier post-emergence applications. In a few cases, it might involve adding something different in your post-emergent application, although they're not much different. You can add post these days. And I say this for all soybean systems. I don't care if you're, the guys that are doing the best job managing weeds, honestly, today are the premier organic growers. Good friend of mine, Derek Strubing, works on our team. Derek farms a little bit of organic stuff. His organic fields are oftentimes cleaner. They're cleaner than the conventional fields, the non-GMO fields. And unfortunately, they're cleaner than some of the enlist fields that are out there. So, if you're not using herbicides and you have only tillage to control weeds, you got to be on your A game. And unfortunately, with the label limitations that exist, the limited options that exist for post-emergence weed control in soybeans, we all got to be on our A game. And that A game involves doing a lot of those weed management practices that Randy used to talk about. So if you're frustrated with your weed control, corn or beans, this conversation isn't just soybeans. The problem is bigger in soybeans because we have fewer post options in soybeans than we do in corn. But there's a lot of guys frustrated with their weed control in corn. There's going to be a tremendous amount of people frustrated with their weed control in soybeans. There's a number, and I don't know what the number is, but it's a big number of soybean fields out there that have been sprayed a few weeks ago. There's a lot of stuff that didn't die, but people haven't figured that out yet. They need to figure it out as soon as possible because the only prayer you have of getting that field cleaned up is to get it resprayed as soon as possible. But if you're respraying a situation like this, you need to do it. I mean, you at least got to set that thing back and defoliate it and put a hurt on it to give the soybeans a chance to get ahead of it. But you are not going to kill this with anything. And if you're looking at that in the field, I mean, yeah, do what you can. You don't ever want to give up on a field. You don't want to walk away from a field, but don't expect to control that either. And don't get mad at somebody when it doesn't die because, it's not going to die. And if it does, it was a miracle. So don't count on it happening again. And I think a lot of people are going to be frustrated with weed control in both corn and beans. And we've got a lot of challenges this year. We had a lot of challenges with weather. We had too much rain at certain times. We had some big rains. Our pre's were compromised in some cases by a big delay in planting after the pre was applied. We had some post-emergence applications that couldn't be made timely due to weather. We had some post-emergence applications that weren't made timely because people don't know what timely means. So a lot of reasons why stuff didn't get managed well, but we're going to learn the hard way what happens when you don't manage weeds well. And you've got certain things that you can do better next year. You've got certain things that you're not going to be able to do better next year. In the case on the enlist acre, if you want to include 2,4-D in your weed control program, you have that option. But if that's the only thing that you're using post, or 2,4-D and Roundup is the only thing you're using post, you're not going to get effective weed control from that. Liberty is what's doing most of the heavy lifting in the enlist system. It's what's doing the heavy lifting in the XtendFlex system these days. Regardless of what happens, with the dicamba label moving forward, we have submitted for a new dicamba label. BSF has submitted for a new dicamba label. Syngenta has submitted for a new dicamba label. So all three registrants that are currently selling over the top dicamba and soybeans have submitted for a new label. We'll see what comes of that. It's going to be a while before we know, what the prospects are for that label. We're optimistic, but we'll stay tuned on that. But regardless of what happens to dicamba, we have good weed control recommendations that don't use dicamba in soybeans. And those recommendations can be every bit as effective as what you're going to get in control out of an enlist program. And both of those systems, to be successful, require a pre-emergent program that's controlling 90% of your weeds. This field, I kid you not, it's solid water hemp. I mean, I don't know how many plants there are per acre, but if your post program only gives you 95% control in this field, it'll be a disaster. Because, 5% of a million is a lot of weeds. We need a pre-program that's controlling 90% of our weeds. So if you get 95% control of 10% of your weeds, I know some guys that couldn't live with that either. I can, and I think more of us are going to have to live with that, because that might be the best you're going to do for a while until we get some new technologies out, so we get a few more tools in the toolbox to go after water hemp. My friend Derek Strubing reminded me there is one tool that most people are unwilling to use that is extremely effective on water hemp, and that would be tillage. So water hemp, being a small seeded broadleaf that germinates close to the soil surface, cultivation, and I'm not talking like a field cultivator before planting. I'm talking like the row crop cultivator, like Grandpa used to use. Derek's got like 3 of them. Got Guidance 16-row cultivator. He's like serious with that cultivator. He has no water hemp whatsoever. Water hemp is not his biggest problem in his organic soybeans. It's velvet leaf, it's giant ragweed, sometimes it's grass. It's not water hemp. Water hemp is a weed that's relatively easy to control. It's got a crappy root system. I mean, that's not much of a root to support that. It can't germinate from depth, and it's got a pretty easy root to pull out. So cultivators that either bury it or dig it out work pretty good on water hemp. But just regardless of what crop we're talking about, you got to have a good pre. If what you've been doing isn't satisfying you, you need a better pre. And I know that better means more money, but we want clean fields. And I get it. You've got a budget that you're trying to stay under, and we're going to ask you not to skimp on seed. We're going to ask you not to skimp on weed control. We're going to ask you not to skimp on fertilizer. I don't know what you're supposed to skimp on, if your budget's not looking, where you want it to be, but I know you want a clean field, and you're not going to get a clean field for $40. We just can't get there today with the weed pressure that we're dealing with. You may not get a clean field for $80. So we're going to have to raise our game in weed management. We're still pouring $2.6 billion a year into R&D to develop HT4, HT5, to develop Conventro, to develop all these technologies that are coming that are going to help us manage water hemp. But they're not going to be here tomorrow. We got to get through this year. We got to get through next year. We got to get through I don't know how many years before we get the next new product. And when the next new water hemp product comes out, if we abandon all the products we've got today and we all switch to the new one, it's going to last about 2 years. So we're going to have to do something different than we've done before. In the past, when Roundup came out, we all switched to that. When Extend came out, we all switched to that. When Enlist came out, a lot of people switched to that. We switched to things, and then in a few years, it's not working so well anymore. We're going to have to start adding things to what we do rather than just switching to something new. Water hemp is tough. It's not going away. And, we're going to have to, raise our bar of management to be able to accomplish the kind of weed control that we've all come to expect. We're a little spoiled here in Central Illinois. We're used to clean fields. I mean, you travel the country, nobody has cleaner fields in Central Illinois. We're a little anal about how clean we think our fields need to be. And that was really easy 20 years ago. You could fix anything. We can't fix anything anymore. We need to prevent problems from occurring, because once you've got a problem, we just can't fix it by throwing Roundup at it like we could 20 years ago. And you're not going to fix it by throwing Liberty at it. You're not going to fix it by throwing 2,4-D at it. You're not going to fix it by throwing 2,4-D and Liberty at it. It's just not going to work. And so we'll talk more about this. And if you need some specific recommendations about, okay, I'm an open book. Help me. What can I do differently next year to do better? We have recommendations for that. You may not want to hear them, but we can give you the information. You can make the decision. Maybe you just want to say, hey, this is just a bad year. It was the weather. I'm going to do the same damn thing next year, and it's going to work better. I wish you well with that strategy. But if you're willing to make some changes, we're doing the research. We know what we need to do a better job. It's just a matter of, are we willing to do it? And I think with that, let me check, see if we got any questions coming in. Okay, so another loyal listener, Jared. When spraying fungicide, ground rig at VT, corn, R3 and beans, would you use adjuvant NIS with uneven corn too? Okay, so this question is kind of related to the uneven corn. And when fungicide injury has occurred in the past in pre-tassel applications, adjuvants, particularly non-ionic surfactant, were a factor in that. A lot of surfactant manufacturers have kind of removed some of the impurities that were thought to be causing that issue. But there's also data to support that the fungicide can be involved in that issue as well. If there's a strobilurin fungicide in there, you can occasionally see some issues at certain timings, even if you don't have non-ionic surfactant in the tank. Now, there was research that was done that showed that non-ionic surfactant can cause a problem. There was research that was done to show fungicide can cause a problem. You put the two together, you're more likely to cause the problem. So removing surfactant does make it less risky to apply fungicide before tassel. If you're 2 days before tassel, I don't care. If you're 2 weeks before tassel, that might be an issue. Crop oil was never really considered to increase the risk. This day and age, there's a lot of, I call them deposition agents that go in the tank on a lot of fungicide applications. Things like wetters and stickers and things that keep the leaf wet and help the product absorb. There could be surfactant in them. Maybe it's a drift control agent. There's a lot of these kind of hybrid products that, they're doing what three different things used to do. Do they contain surfactant? Do they not? That's a question for the manufacturer of that product. I would be talking to your chemical supplier who's in touch with the manufacturers to get the best recommendation for the particular products you're using. Don't take my word for it. Talk to the manufacturers that are manufacturing what you're using. In general, I want adjuvants with fungicides. Adjuvants are designed to make the products that we're applying work better. And I get frustrated as a farmer when in some cases the adjuvants are costing more than the whole trip used to cost. But they are still a relatively small percentage of the total spend, and they're making the really expensive products that you're using work better. So you can improve your crop safety by pulling them out. You're also reducing the efficacy of the fungicide that you're applying by pulling them out. Now, if you're applying with a ground rig and you got 20 gallons of water and you're getting really good coverage and really get really good penetration, can you make the argument that I need that product less than the aerial application does? Yeah, maybe. I haven't seen any data to prove that, but I could make the argument. Don't know whether the argument's right or not, but there's a lot of arguments that get made that the people making them have no idea whether they're right or not, but they sound good and people believe them. So away we go. But I would say in general, if you're within a few days of tassel, I don't think there's much concern. If you're spraying a field that's got parts of the field that are, 2 leaves or more away from tassel, which would be a week plus, you could be in the window where a little bit of pinched ear syndrome could occur. And in that scenario, I would be careful with the addition of non-ionic surfactant. Outside of that, I would say, I would always recommend you use the adjuvants that are recommended by the label of the product that you're using. If the product label gives you the option to use crop oil instead of non-ionic surfactant, I would do that. If the label, wants non-ionic surfactant, I would try to use non-ionic surfactant with that product. Okay, so I think that's our last question that I've seen here. So I'm going to check my list real quick. Yield chasers. So Jennifer Elliott, who is our virtual producer today, is also our lead cheerleader for yield chasers. So I talked before, and you may or may not have heard me say this, depending on, we've had like 3 different episodes here today in annoying little chunks. So you might have missed this, but I think the potential in this crop is fabulous. We could have some scary good crops if things go well the rest of the summer. So I think a month ago, I think people were like, well, screw that yield chaser thing. My corn's not going to be worth a crap. I'm not going to waste the time entering that. Well, I hope you feel better about your corn today than you maybe did a month ago. And regardless of how you feel about your crop, whether you think it's a top 5 best ever, where do you think it's a turd, get involved in yield chasers. It's a lot of fun. We have a great banquet at the end of the year where we celebrate the success of, and if it's not your success, hopefully you can have a little bit of love for the people that did have success. And if not, we'll have a good steak dinner. We'll have some good speakers. I might be one of them, but I won't be the good ones. And we'll have some prizes, and it's a lot of fun, and we just celebrate and recognize people who are trying to produce higher yields, which is really what we're all about. One more. I'm gonna get back up on my soapbox here. So one thing that's a little bit concerning to me that I'm hearing a little chatter about in the marketplace. Some of this chatter is being driven by the competition. Some of this chatter is being driven by frustrated corn growers who are looking at water hemp in their cornfields, and they don't like seeing water hemp in their cornfields. There's a little bit of talk about maybe we need to be using more Liberty in corn. And if anybody is thinking maybe that sounds like a good idea, a couple things. There's a lot of corn being planted that you can't spray Liberty on because it's not resistant to Liberty. And Liberty is also really the last line of defense against weeds in soybeans. And, as an old Monsanto guy, we took a lot of shots from a lot of people. A lot of them are some of the same people that took shots at us for using Roundup too much, that are the same people that are suggesting, well, maybe you ought to use Liberty every year, multiple times in both crops. Not a good idea. We've got options to get good weed control in corn. We don't need Liberty Post in corn to have clean fields of corn. If you're not satisfied with the corn program you did this year, let's talk about it. Let's design a better program. Let's design a better non-Liberty program for your corn. Let's save Liberty for soybeans, which is where we really need it. And let's not break that tool prematurely by using it too much. So some people are going to call me a hypocrite for saying that because I wasn't saying that about Roundup 10 years ago. Maybe I should have been. So let's learn from the past. Let's not repeat the past. That seems like a kind of a human thing. We repeat, history repeats itself. I don't see any more questions, so we're already over time anyway. And I appreciate you being with us for our multiple disconnected episodes of Ask the Agronomist. If you have more questions that you didn't ask in the chat, get them to your FSR, get them to your TA. Maybe they'll be fodder for our next episode, which, speaking of the next episode, Jennifer, you aren't doing your job. You didn't tell me when my next episode is. Let me look here. Let me get to a calendar. She'll tell me before I get there. Next episode will be July 11th. So 2 weeks, 2 weeks from today. And my fingers crossed, maybe 2 weeks from today, we'll get through a whole episode without having to reconnect and jump through all those hoops. So thanks for joining. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your patience. Appreciate you all, and everybody stay safe. Get your fungicide applied timely, and hope for rain with no hail, no wind. So take care.